السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سعادة وكيل الوزارة للتخطيط والتطوير دكتور نايف الرومي، سعادة الحضور، سعادة الأخوة والأخوات الزملاء، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نحييكم اليوم في الجلسة، في أول جلسات هذا اليوم، وراح يكون إن شاء الله يعني ضيف ومقدم هذه البرنامج البروفيسور راح يكون معنا البروفيسور تان اون سينغ من المعهد السنغافوري للتعليم. وإن شاء الله راح يكون موضوع المحاضرة اليوم طبعا موضوع مختلف عن ما هو موجود في الجدول. راح يكون الموضوع يتحدث عن السياسات والتجارب وأثرها في بناء الكفاءات للمعلمين، والكفاءات اللي تعتمد على المعرفة. سيرة الدكتور تان أون سينغ سيرة يعني حافلة، ونستأذن في اختصارها، وهي موجودة أيضا في كتاب المعرض بشكل مفصل. الدكتور بروفيسور تان يجمع بين تخصصين مهمين جدا، التخصص الأول في التربية، والتخصص الثاني في علم النفس التربوي، وأيضا له كثير من التجارب والخبرات اللي مر فيها خلال فترة عمله. طبعا بدأ هو رئيس قسم الدراسات النفسية في المعهد، وبعد ذلك أيضا أصبح أستاذ مشارك في الدراسات النفسية، ومدير مركز تيماساك للتعليم المبني على حل المشكلات، ونائب بعد ذلك تولى نائب مدير المركز للعلوم التطبيقية، ونائب المدير للموارد البشرية وتنمية التدريس، أعضاء هيئة التدريس في المعهد. البروفيسور تان الفترة الحالية هو عميد تعليم المعلمين، والمشرف على الإدارة وتطوير كافة البرامج الخاصة بإعداد المعلمين. طبعا الدكتور تان نال كثير من الشهادات، وشارك في في تأليف مجموعة من الكتب والأبحاث. يعني لمزيد من الاطلاع نرجعكم لكتيب المعرض والمنتدى. وراح يكون إن شاء الله يشاركنا اليوم في الجلسة الأستاذ خالد العضيب، راح يكون هو مقرر الورشة. الزمن المخصص مدته ساعة. راح يتحدث سعادة البروفيسور حوالي يعني تقريبا 3/4 الوقت، وهذا حسب الاتفاق بينه وبين الصباح، وراح يكون باقي الوقت ربع ساعة متاحة لأسئلتكم ومداخلاتكم. وشكرا. يتفضل الدكتور وينغ بليز.
Very good morning to all. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my thanks to the Ministry of Education and the organizers for putting together this very excellent conference. I was sharing with your Saudi colleagues that I'm very impressed by the momentum and the development that is happening in this city. So this morning I will share with you about teacher education frontiers, on strategic policies and effective practices for building teacher competencies in this 21st century. While we observe the quality journeys that is happening, is a bit like this. Some of you may be familiar with what is called the Penrose art. Okay, let me see if I can get the pointer. Sorry. Yeah, right. So educational reform is like this, you know. You climb and you climb and you climb and you climb and you climb, right? And then you climb again and you climb and you climb and you climb and you climb and you climb. And you thought you are climbing again and you go climbing again. And it looks like you are back in square one. A lot of investment has been made in educational reforms all over the world. But it's very, very important to look at the real impact, because very often the returns of investment in reform is not as high as what we expect. I happen to also run a journal called Educational Research for Policy and Practice, and that gives me quite a good view of some of the policies and practices that has been happening all over the world. A lot of my sharing will be based on my latest edited book, which I call Teacher Education Frontiers. And in this book, I emphasize that education is the most important investment in the long haul for all governments. When governments invest in education, that is the best investment for the long haul. Why? Because education is key to nation building. It is key for people's capacity to adapt. I think in the last 2 days, you have heard from the very distinguished speakers about the importance of adapting to the 21st century. And of course, it is education that is going to determine a lot on the value creation ability of the country's economy. And education is certainly key for innovation. And at the forefront of all education reform is a very key anchoring factor. And that factor is what I call the teacher factor. Very often policies revolve around things like curriculum, systems, but the teacher factor is actually the most important factor. So in order for a country to have effective reforms in education, we have to be able to produce what I call the thinking and the innovative teachers. And for that, we need some courageous action to really help teachers. So what I'll do this morning is I'll say something about the 21st century impact. I'd like to talk about some tipping points in education, the need for 21st century teacher education practices in particular, and then I'll share with you what we do in terms of the Singapore educational policies and practices. I think we all recognize the pace of change in technology. But it's very important to see that when you have a new technology and you have a new infrastructure, it is not so much just the structure, but the kind of thinking behind that has to change. One of the greatest inventions, you can say, is the transistor in the early years. Many of you here are engineers and science people. We know that when the transistor was invented, it was deemed to have solved the problem of the heavy vacuum tubes. You know that in the olden days, the radio and the televisions were very huge, mainly because they used the vacuum tubes. And the vacuum tubes was very inefficient because they produce a lot of heat, and it is very bulky. So when the transistor was invented, it solved the problem of the huge, heavy machineries, and at the same time it reduces the problem of the high waste of energy because of the production of heat. But actually it is the importance of the invention of the transistor was not so much about solving the heat or the massiveness problem. The transistor brought about a very important thinking. As we know, in all communications, in all electronic communication, you need an electronic signal. And what the transistor does is that it produces what we call the 0 and 1 concept, which is that you switch something on and off. So the 0, 1, 1, 0, that kind of a concept. We know that in all systems, in any machinery, we have a lot of relays, right? The switching circuits, the switchboard, and so on. So the transistor allows for a quick, simple switching. But more importantly, the transistor brings about this digital world whereby with just 2 digits, 1 and 0, you can code anything, right? It's just that the number of digits will be very long. So you can have, for every communication signal represented by 1001 or 0001. And so that binary system lay the foundation for the digital world. So those who get it right recognize that what is important is the revolutionizing of the thinking in that digital world. And we also can see that from the transistor, we now have the Intel Pentium, right? And we know that the Pentium, which is just the size of your fingernail, right, today comprises millions and millions of transistors. And it's getting even smaller. And it is precisely because of supercomputer and the speed with which intelligence, information can be processed that brought about a great change in all other fields. The Human Genome Project, as we all know, those of you who teach biology, right, is the science is about the intelligence in classifying and categorizing. But the problem is that in the older computer, in order to go through, right, the genome sequence, it takes hundreds and hundreds of days to process a sequence and information. But the advent of the supercomputer allow this complex classification and reclassification could be done within a very short time. And the latest today, we all know that what it used to take years, and then months, and then weeks, today you can get a DNA sequence within 1 day. Yeah. So there is the pace and the thinking is very, very different. The problems that we face in the recent years are all of a different nature. Unanticipated, the nature of terrorism, collapse of financial markets, traditional economics that don't work today, and universities are resisting teaching behavioral economics when the traditional classical economics are facing problems. So we have a whole new set of world where we need an understanding for every citizen in terms of, number one, globalization, secondly, technology, and not just knowledge. I think we kept talking about the knowledge-based economy, but smart knowledge. There is also a need for educational system which is very routine to bring about an understanding of what I call the tolerance of uncertainty. How do you then work with a high degree of uncertainty? One important idea, therefore, is the need for a multidisciplinary thinking and practice. And this means that the teachers, too, need to have a multidisciplinary mindset. Story was told about this famous Professor Einstein, who once took a train. It was winter. He bought his ticket. He went up the train. And then the train conductor came up to him and asked him for his ticket. Einstein had so many pockets, and he just couldn't find his ticket. And then he turned to the train conductor and says that, well, I really bought my ticket. It's just that I don't know where I put it. And then he then tell the conductor, oh, by the way, my name is Einstein and I am a university professor. And the conductor realized that, hey, this guy is a famous professor. And he said to him, well, sir, don't worry about your ticket. Don't worry about your ticket. It's okay. So the conductor walked away. A few minutes later, when the conductor walked down the aisles of the train, he found that Einstein was still very busy looking for his ticket. So he went up to the professor and says, sir, don't worry about your ticket. Don't worry about ticket. I know who you are. And Einstein looked at him and said, I also know who I am, but I don't know where I'm going. Well, just to illustrate to you that many times the important question is, where are we going? Where are we going in the light of all this complexity when there's a higher degree of problem, a shorter time span to solve problem, and problems of a much global integrative scale? I think we all agree, and it's best to learn from the multinationals because that's where the real world is. And if you look at what multinationals look for, they will tell you that the first thing is we need people who have good problem-solving skill, problem-solving acumen, teamwork, interpersonal skills, creativity, project management, system perspective. These are not new. We have heard this many times. The key is how do we translate this into teacher training and within the education itself. Education and training will not be valuable if we are teaching content that becomes obsolete very, very quickly. I think if Bill Gates had gone through his computer course, he would have to study Fortran and COBOL. And there will be no Windows today. Many of the breakthroughs in knowledge today happen without the benefit of the traditional ways of thinking. So it is very important for us to recognize about that. If we impart skills that are not transferable to the work situation, look at the hours and the time spent in school all the way to the university. How much of this are skills that are transferable to the workplace? What about the learning processes? If we use learning processes that do not impact on the lifelong and life-wide learning, how much of the processes that we use in learning that the students spend in the class impact on the quality of the thinking? In our college, we graduate about 2,300 teachers a year for the Singapore educational system. And through the year, I go into the classroom a lot to see teachers. And I always tell the teachers, actually, I'm not looking at you. When I go into a classroom, the question that I ask is, what is going on in the mind of the learner right now? What is going on in the mind of that child right now while you're up there, while you're talking? So it is the quality of learning processes that have to impact on, life-wide is not a good English word. They use lifelong learning. But I've decided to use the word life-wide because when you talk to the young people these days, including the young teachers, that you need lifelong learning, they don't think so long. So I have to change the term. I say life-wide learning rather than lifelong learning. What about the learning environment? Do we use learning environments that do not encourage true motivation and independence? So there are two important tipping points. We all know that the nature of the knowledge has changed. The nature of the real world has changed. And also the nature of the participation have changed. I like to call the new generation of learners the epic learners. EPIC as an acronym. E for experiential. Today's young learners look for experience. Experience is very, very important to them. P, they are highly participatory. They want a sense of ownership and participation in learning. I, they are a very imagery generation where visuals is very, very important part of learning. And C, they are a highly connected generation. They like to learn connecting with their peers. So we need participation in learning that promote self-direction, collaboration, and good use of technology and human mediation. We have to move away from classroom environment that infantizes student learning with just silent note-taking and discipline, where there is a deprivation of expression of talents, real analytical skills, debate, and persuasion. And I think companies always complain about the lack of communication skills, presentation skills, writing skills, and important nuances of leadership. I have a book called Problem-Based Learning in the 21st Century. And I argue that developing intelligence basically is all about the ability to solve problems, particularly solving problems in the real world. Because when you solve a problem in the real world, you don't use only one kind of thinking. You use multiple kinds of thinking. So that is something I will elaborate further. Secondly, gone are the days where intelligence and knowledge reside within the individual. So you need to get information not just from the individual, but from other groups of people. How do you form network of groups? And you need to know how to immerse yourself in an environment that will enable you to get the necessary information to solve the problem. Well, like in Riyadh, Singapore, we have no resources, zero resources, right? In Riyadh, you have no resources except oil, which is, of course, a very valuable resource. But the key is that if you look at history, history tells us that cities with no hinterland in terms of both natural, food, agricultural, water, and so on, don't last more than 50 years. That is based on history, right? But we all know that that argument in history is no longer valid. Why? Because today it is not about your immediate hinterland. Today it is about where is your supply chain and your network, right? So if you have all the network of your agricultural supply, it doesn't matter where you are. You just make sure you have that network that will enable you to survive. And it's easy to understand this because if you look at a very simple example all over the world is supermarkets. So one day you have Kmart, the next day you have Walmart, you have all kinds of supermarket chain. The name changes every few years. You hear that one company has gone bankrupt and another supermarket takes over. But if you walk into the supermarket, you will realize everything in the supermarket looks the same. So how is it that one company will collapse the next day and another survive? So it is not in that outward display. The question is the thinking behind. So an intelligent supermarket will have practically no warehouse. A poor supermarket have a big warehouse. So it's a question of not what you warehouse, but a question of how do you have that supply chain. So in a good supermarket, everything moves. The warehouse is just a transit. I use this analogy to illustrate that it is again a different form of thinking from a static accumulation to one of dynamic movement. This is true also of the way we think and knowledge. I'm a psychologist by training, and many developments have happened in the neuroscience and the learning sciences. And this gives us a lot of hope and opportunity to really enhance thinking in education. So that is why education needs to draw a lot from the advances of the learning sciences, brain development, and so on, apart from traditional pedagogy. And I want to say that the brain functions optimally when you take care of two important factors. One, which we call habits. The brain learns very well by habits. The traditional educational system, the good system, right, from the good tradition of behaviorism, neo-behaviorism, cognitivism, and the integration of all of it all, have made good use of the understanding of habits, and that is what we call the patterning system. We do not throw away the power of learning through habits. By that I mean the idea that within an educational system, right, teachers use good memory systems, students do learn by memory, students do learn by imitation, students do learn by modeling. These are good and these are important. And in fact, in order to do well, students need to have that the fundamental of learning through what I call this 3M: memory, imitation, and modeling. But sometimes we overdo it. Like in Singapore, a system where there is intensive learning by memory, imitation, and modeling. Not only in Singapore, in many of the East Asian countries, in Japan, in Korea, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, a lot of the 3Ms kind of learning. There's nothing wrong with that, except that when you overdo it, right, then we have been doing a disservice to our students. Many of you know that in Singapore, we have a national service. All the young men have to go through military service, compulsory military service. I went through compulsory military service too. And you know, when you go through a military service, especially if you go through a specialized training, at the end of the training, there will be a passing out parade. And a group of high school students who went through this training were told that this time, in the passing out parade, the person who is coming to grace the occasion, a general, is a very smart man. And this general, when he graced this occasion, he don't just walk through the parade square. He likes to stop and he will ask the cadet questions. So the cadets were told that you better think on your feet because the general is going to ask you questions. Now, all these cadets were trained, you know, in the A-level high school system. And so they were very nervous. You know, they used to pass their exams by memorizing, by past exam questions, by learning to the test. And now they are told that, hey, you're going to be thinking on your feet. And so the cadets were very worried. And then they asked the platoon commander, sir, please help us. Try and get some information about the general. And in the last parade, what kind of question he asked? And give us some examples so that we know how to answer the general. The commander went to find out and he came back and he was very happy. He told the cadets, oh, it's all right. The question that the general asked are very, very simple, you know. The last parade, he stopped by this cadet and the first question he asked the cadet was, cadet, how old are you? You are 20 years old, just say 20, all right? Remember that. The second question he asked the cadet was, cadet, in the course of this military training, how many battalion exercises have you been to? A battalion exercise is like, you know, a kind of a simulated war. And, you know, they probably go through about 4 or 5 such sessions, and you just tell him 5, okay? And the last question he asked was, are you trained to fight in land or sea? And you better say both. All the cadets were happy. The great day came and the general stood by this nervous cadet. And his first question was, cadet, how many battalion exercises have you been involved in? Without thinking, the cadet says, 20, sir. The general was very impressed. He said, my goodness, the productivity of this camp has gone up tremendously. 20 battalion exercises within such a short time. By the way, how old are you, cadet? And the cadet says, 5, sir. The general wasn't amused anymore. He looked at the cadet in the eye and said that under this hot sun, either I'm crazy or you are crazy. The cadet looked at the general and says, both, sir. Anyway, this is exaggeration of learning by memorization and imitation. But indeed, among our graduates these days, employers often complain that whilst our graduates are book smart, they often are not able to handle a real-world problem in a flexible way. I want to say that one of the major shifts from the learning of neuroscience and from what is happening is that we need to take care not only of the habits aspect of the mind, but what I call the novelty aspect. Because actually the human brain is optimized best by dealing both with habits and the quest for novelty, the quest for newness. Everybody likes some new experience, a playful experience, experience of a creative environment. And this is where education needs to inject much more the inquiry and what I call the problem-based perspective. What is different is that when you solve a problem and when you take an inquiry approach, the thinking behind shift from just what I call analytical thinking to the big picture or the matrix thinking, and that thinking that prepares us to deal with ambiguity. If you look at the advancement in medical science, I do some teaching at the postgraduate medical institute at the Singapore General Hospital, mainly training the doctors and specialists in the areas of psychology. And if you look at the way medicine have progressed, you will find that actually a lot of the thinking moved from just the strong analytical thinking to what I call the holistic, visual, multi-dimensional thinking. In other words, it is not just about a big picture thinking, but it is about a multi-dimensionality. You see, the idea of education has been one which is powered by a strong emphasis on analysis. Now, we all know the meaning of analysis. It means to analyze, means to break something down into the smallest part. And that is the most efficient way for learning, right? So, learning from the tradition of behaviorism, all our curriculum are organized this way. We have a broad topic, and then we break it down into smaller and smaller and smaller topic, right? Now, this is inherited from the Industrial Revolution. Because during the Industrial Revolution, we all know the advancement happened because we were able to capitalize on the power of analysis. So in those times, the invention of the microscope, for example, was a big step forward because it allowed us to analyze things even deeper, right? So everything was broken down into the smallest part. And the smallest part that cannot be broken further, we call them the atom, and from which we have all other building blocks. So that is the way in which we build knowledge, by always breaking things down into smaller parts where deductive reasoning, inferential reasoning reaches height. But what is it that we need today in terms of a new renaissance of thinking? What is it different from the analytical thinking? Well, it is about the big picture thinking. In other words, you do not just break things into the small parts. You now ask yourself, how are parts being linked? How does it link in many, many, many different dimensions? And this big picture thinking is something that is greatly missing in our educational system. So that is the analytical approach, right? So today we need to look at things from a more holistic approach. I tell the doctors, that many of you are not good doctors because you are a doctor of the disease or the doctor of the organ. Medical specialization have gone to the extent where when you see a medical specialist, the guy who attends to your stomach will tell you that if you have, a problem with your lung, that's not my problem. Please see another doctor. And the guy who sees the lung will not care about anything else, right? So you become a doctor of the disease or a doctor of the organ, but you are not a doctor of the person. The key is that a doctor should be a doctor of the person, and that is what holistic medicine is all about. This analogy has great relevance because when we talk about education, it is the same thing. The teacher is not just a teacher of the subject, but the teacher is a teacher of the learner. So there is a new momentum needed to bridge the gap between theory and practice, to deal with information in a very smart way, right? And education, it is really not just about preparing people for the future. I remember years ago, during the almost 10 years actually, during the dot-com era, when I was in Silicon Valley visiting Stanford, Oracle, and things like that. And we had a delegation from Singapore, and we were in Oracle. We didn't see Lawrence Ellison, the CEO, but some of his deputy came along. And we said, well, we came here to learn from you how to prepare for the future, how to plan for the future. In Singapore, we have a very strong planning culture. They plan everything, everybody plan. From the ministerial level down to the teacher. Every day they spend the time planning, and writing plan, They call them rolling plan because they just write it down and then it rolls away, right? So we said that we want to plan for the future because it's a changing era. And one of the executives at Oracle looked at me and said, well, you came to the wrong place. And we thought, what do you mean? He says, in Silicon Valley, we don't plan. We don't plan. There's no need to plan. We didn't understand what it means. He said, we don't plan for the future, but we invent the future. We invent the future. Because if you keep planning for the future, you'll be always behind. You need to invent the future. And that ephemerism is not far from the truth if you look at what has happened in this whole digital revolution just within the last few years, right? YouTube, you name it, right? Facebook, Twitter, whatever, right? All of this have changed the future. So education is about making the educators a designer of the learning environment, designing what we need to provide in terms of the environment for the students to ensure that the students learn in new ways of self-direction, collaboration, and so on. I will move a little quickly. At one time, the Straits Times in Singapore ran a series called the Tech and Science series. It's called the Microsoft Inventor series, and they repeatedly interview me about creativity and so on. And I sat in the, one day, Philips Innovation came to me, and they asked me to join them in the Philips Innovation group. And one of the things that I want to say is that while working with the engineers, I discovered that what makes the successful creative engineer? First, it is those who have a very special motivation and holistic involvement in their work. And they are those who are able to harness resources and intelligence. At the same time, they can generate ideas. They can be very divergent in their thinking. But they are not just divergent in their thinking. On the other hand, they know when to become analytical and when to be systematic. And they are also what we call the highly analogical, paralogical, meaning that when something that they develop doesn't work for a particular system, they are very fast to shift it, to apply it to another system, rather than to throw it away. There are people who have the big picture. They know when to bring ideas to fruition. They know when to connect, how to connect, and they also know how to collaborate. That gives me a deep impression that if we want workers, right, to be effectively creative in this kind of knowledge-based economy, this should be the genesis. It is not about going back and looking at the curriculum and just looking at the content. It is about what is it that make real-world success. At a Stanford alumni meeting, I met Wأثرها, who was a Nobel Prize winner. Wأثrها discovered the superfluidity of the helium-3 ion. But just to cut the long story short, Wأثrها tells me that his best PhD students were often not in the traditional disciplines of physics, of which he is a professor. In fact, he talked about students who are from archaeology and so on, that gave some of the brilliant and newest ideas. So I just want to mention that our way of thinking in standard disciplines, right, have to change. Well, so what is the way to go forward? The macro perspective, the micro perspective, the wide-angle perspective, the telescopic perspective. I think in terms of teacher education reform, just within the last 2 years, there's so much literature that is being put. McKinsey have talked about standards and accountability, equity, professionalism, high standards expectation. I think the World Bank talk about standards, policies, workload, compensation, school leadership, unions, and so on. So what do? Well, in Singapore, the approach that we take is that we feel that it is very important to have a very strong big picture that is highly connected to the pieces in terms of the policy inception, design, and implementation. And some of the key parts in connecting all of this is about the clarity, communication, and also capacity. I think one of the important things is that change, whether happening at the macro or the micro level, must look into what we call longevity, the ownership, and the sustainability. So the way we start is we talk about the impact factor of education. The key idea is that everything that we change, how does it, at the end of the day, impact on the child? I think there is some place for standards and accountability in terms of the efficient use of data. So data that is collected must be used. If data is collected and is not used, then it should not be collected. I think that is very important. Otherwise, we waste a lot of time and energy collecting a lot of data and not using them. Secondly, in terms of the human capital management, I think good recruitment is very important. And I think we're very familiar with the idea of professional development. And in terms of structure and organization, what is important is good governance in terms of what we call the top-down and the bottom-up. Some of the things that make Singapore successful is what I call the ability-based educational system, where education is pitched at a level that will meet the students' cognitive ability. There's a strong emphasis in the foundation of mathematics and science in Singapore, which turned out to be very good cognitive way of looking at it, because in a sense, language and mathematics form the foundation of thinking. So language is very important because without the vocabulary and without the sophistication of vocabulary, you cannot have creativity, right? So we emphasize language very importantly. And mathematics is important because it is the foundation of science, where you need good quantitative reasoning. More than 10 years ago, we emphasized the fact that schools must be thinking schools, and the nation need to be a learning nation. And as we moved through the progress, we went through different campaign and emphasis, one on innovation. And at one point, we talk about teaching less, reducing the content curriculum by as much as 20% in order that the student will learn more. We have a foundation of bilingual policy, and it is possible to succeed in more than one languages. National education continue to feature, and we pay good attention to character and holistic framework, and of course ICT in education. One important thing is what I call the triangle. Now, this is a very important triangle that is somewhat unique in the case of Singapore, right? If you look at this triangle, right, you see the Ministry of Education, the school, and the university. Now, the important idea here is that if you look at this Penrose art again, nobody is at the top. Nobody is at the top. It is not the ministry, it is not the school, it is not the university. But if you look at the picture carefully, sometimes the university is at the top, sometimes the ministry is at the top, sometimes the school is at the top. Now, this is a very, very important key to overall success. Although the ministry dictates certain policies, but as the university, we assert very strongly our views based on research, right? And the schools, they are the people who are doing the practice. And therefore, it is very, very important for us to listen very carefully from where the ground up is coming. And I can say quite confidently that this whole triangle, over the years, have evolved in such a way that there is a strong mutual respect of the intelligence coming from each of these corners. So that in that way, you won't go in extreme in certain policies and practices. Right, I'll skip this. So what is the good teacher education model? First, in the curriculum, we believe in what we call the skillful teacher. So I tell a teacher, when we first equip you, you better be able to go into the classroom and have key important skills. And the way we train the skills is not based on lots of theory. We begin with a lot of problems. We give them problems that is happening in the classroom. A group of students that are very restless, a kid struggling in learning something, right? Children with emotional problems. We begin with all these kind of problem scenarios in the classroom. And from the problem scenario, we work on the kind of skills that teachers need to have. And it is from there that they derive and obtain theories in order to solve this problem. So it is a skillful approach. But on the other hand, we want a thinking teacher. So on the basis of this problem solving, they have to do a lot of reflective thinking and to embrace a big spectrum of theories and practices. In the early years, I have a book called Educational Psychology. And so when we tell the students to globalize, I have to be an example of globalization, right? So the book is not used in Singapore only. It is used in in a much larger market. The Singapore market is very small, but it's used in a very large market in China. So it is translated into Chinese and is used in the teacher education colleges in China. Then again, of course, a book has to be revised because in the old traditional ways, it doesn't click with the children. So you got to make it lively. You got to make it multi-dimensional, right, in order to bridge the generation context. So I always tell my staff at the college that the onus is on the university staff to make ourselves relevant to the community. We decided not to fight battles. If people tell you you are irrelevant, it is your responsibility to make yourself relevant, rather than stand on our pinnacle and talk about just research, in ways that do not meet the needs of the ground.
Yes, Professor. There is time for questions, please.
Okay, so I will move faster. So I just want to say that what then are some of the key ideas here? I think we need to move away from what we call requirement and recruitment to what I call the teacher symbol. The teacher symbol is very, very, very important in a society. When the teacher symbol is right, when the teacher's image is right, then you find that society will respect the teachers and the people, right, will really appreciate the value of the teacher. Rather than working on teachers' workload and roles, we emphasize what we call the teacher calling. In fact, at the college, the most important thing that we ask for is for the teachers to have that conviction and the calling to the profession. Rather than concentrating on just salary and benefits, I think the key is to have good teacher professional development. And just looking at the results and accountability is not important. It's not enough. We have to care more for what we call the professional care and professional clinical practices. And rather than looking at management per se, we should be looking at teacher leadership and inspiration. So I will close with this last slide, which was something which I crafted to lay the framework for the 21st century teacher education. We had a new Minister of Education, and then he came to my college, and he wanted to know what I teach, what we teach with the teachers. And I said, the first thing we teach, Minister, is values. The second thing we teach, Minister, is values. The third thing we teach, Minister, is values. What do I mean by this? I said, when they come to the college, I tell them that, first of all, when you are a teacher of the learner. The child is the most important thing. And because you care for the child, you will learn all you can about educational psychology, about the development of the child, about the mind of the child, about the diverse needs of the child, so that the teacher, more than any other professional, has great confidence that all children can learn and achieve. And the teacher, maybe even more than the parents, believe that the child can learn whatever the state the child is, because you are empowered with the knowledge of the child. That is the value number one. Value number two is what I call the teacher identity. All over the world, I think teachers are subjected to tremendous pressure. Teachers lost that sense of professional identity. And so the second value that we emphasize to our teachers is the personhood of the teacher. What are you in terms of your identity as a teacher? And we say that if you don't have a calling, right? If you don't have a calling, then you not fit to be a teacher, because a teacher must come with that calling, that sense and quest for excellence, and that role model for excellence. And therefore, the teachers set high standards for themselves, and they develop themselves not because of anything else, but because they care for that professional identity. The third area of a value is we tell the teacher, yes, you face a lot of problems in the class. You face a lot of problems with the parents, with the society, but you do not walk alone, because as a teacher, you belong to a community. And the idea is that every teacher, no matter you are 1 year old, you are 2 year old, you can help somebody younger. You can always mentor a younger teacher. But at the same time, every teacher has to learn from another wiser teacher. In other words, you need to be mentored. So the idea of a teacher as a profession is that in this community, we are always learning from somebody who is mentoring us, and we are always mentoring another person. And we provide a mechanism for such professional learning community to take place. So when you have the focus on the child, the identity, and the community right, you have a right value system. And with this, you can build on the skills and the knowledge, whatever it comes. So my time is up, so I think I need to thank you for your attention, and I will take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. شكرا بروفيسور تان. لو لاحظتوا الموضوع كان موضوع ما شاء الله موضوع ثري. العام الماضي على نفس هذا الستيج كان يتكلم البروفيسور لي شو، وهو أيضا من نفس المعهد اللي هو NIE. أنا لي تجربة بسيطة مع المعهد. أتذكر زرته عام 2003، وكان المعهد فعلا له رؤية أن يكون مصدر إشعاع وشراكة مباشرة حتى مع المدرسة ومع وزارة التربية في سنغافورة. النموذج السنغافوري نموذج متميز، نموذج مناسب للنظام اللي نسميه نظام يعني يعتمد على يعني شبه مركزية في قضية التعليم أو في نفس النظام. لاحظنا طبعا سعادة البروفيسور كان يعني مليء بالمعرفة والمعلومة، وأنا أهنيه على قدرته على تنظيم هذه الأفكار حقيقة. الوقت صراحة يعني ما كنت حاب أقاطعه، لأن متفقين على أن يكون فيه ربع ساعة الأسئلة، لكن لاحظت يعني من وجيه الحضور أنهم كانوا يعني متفاعلين مع المحاضرة. فلدينا يعني وقت بسيط جدا، إذا سمحون الأخوان المنظمين، في حدود يعني تقريبا 5 دقائق للأسئلة، وأتمنى أن تكون الأسئلة مختصرة ومباشرة. إذا كان أحد عنده سؤال، في الأخ اللي خلف الكاميرا مباشرة، بعدين الأستاذ هنا. تفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أول شيء نشكر محاضرنا على المحاضرة القيمة. ذكر في ثنايا حديثه أن التعليم من مهمات التعليم هو جعل المعلمين هم المصممين لبيئة التعليم. أتمنى أنه يفصل لنا في تلك الجزئية، يعني هل توكل دور الوزارة ويعطى للمعلم لكي يصمم برنامجه التعليمي وفقاً لاحتياجات البيئة المدرسية، أو وفقاً لاحتياجات المجتمع أو وفقاً لاحتياجات المنهج أو وفقاً لاحتياجات أبناء الطلاب. أتمنى يفصل لنا فيها.
شكرا، بس لو تعرف بنفسك.
محمد البلوي.
شكرا محمد.
Yeah, thank you very much for the excellent question. Indeed, in order to teachers to become designers, of course, I think the Ministry of Education, therefore, first of all, in terms of curriculum design, need to have a more dynamic involvement of teachers in the design of the curriculum, both in terms of the disciplines as well as in terms of the pedagogy. In Singapore, the reason why we recruit people with a very high content discipline is that, I'll give you an example. Let's say from the pool of mathematics teacher, we recruit people who have gone through our two comprehensive universities, as well as many teachers that we have sent overseas, including to Ivy League universities in Stanford, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, and the top universities. They come back to be part of our teaching team. Yeah. But when we need to design a curriculum, we need to innovate a curriculum. These people from the school system are drawn in. So they have a deep, rich disciplinary knowledge, not only from one source. That means not only a Singapore university perspective, but a world perspective to the discipline. So that's why the quality of the teachers that you recruit in the system is very important. So they can be involved in that curriculum, both in terms of the disciplinary content as well as the environmental design. The second aspect of the teacher as a designer, more importantly, is in the pedagogy. So in pre-service, what we do is we deliberately expose the teachers to the whole range of teaching pedagogy, from problem-based learning to case-based learning, right, to all kinds of group online collaborative learning, right, so that the teachers are very equipped with a range of pedagogy, and therefore they can then design the pedagogy and contextualize it to the students that are in need in the kind of the school environment and neighborhood that they are involved in.
Yes. There's another question, please. Yes, please. طيب، فيما يجهز السؤال هنا بس أشوف الأخوات المنظمات إذا كان في سؤال فوق في أقصى الركن هناك عند الأخوات. تفضلوا.
جاهز. My name is Rana Al-Hanaya. I'm a translation student in KSU. You mentioned that some universities refuse teaching behavioral economics. Could you please elaborate on that, and why do you think this happens? Thank you.
Okay, I think recently in Singapore we have a think tank that was being formed, and they asked me to give me recommendations of names of professors, and I told the think tank that you need to go not only to university professors, you actually need to go to invite some of the 15-year-old and 17-year-old who are the likes of your Mark Zuckerberg. Even in Singapore, I've come across a 15-year-old who are multi-millionaire because they deal with the hosting and things like that. So what I'm trying to say is that actually the great knowledge don't reside within professors. Secondly, professors oftentimes, I'm a professor myself, so I'm criticizing my own profession, so to speak. But the point is that we are often caught up with our very narrow field of thinking. And of course, I think it is good to be deep in your field, but sometimes you are so caught up with it that you don't realize that the way the world works is very different. So, for example, in the field of economics, I think behavioral economics have explained this new world very differently from just the classical economics, right? So, there are sectors in these faculties where they refuse to move to this new area. So, what I'm trying to emphasize is that the professors themselves need to be role model in this.
Assalamu alaikum.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor, for this presentation. I'd like you.
Okay. معليش لحظة شوي.
اخوان لو سمحت شوف لي في جرس الطوارئ في الخلف.
Looks like my talk is causing a lot of alarm.
جرس الطوارئ في الخلف خليك معاه.
طيب
Can I ask my question now?
سوري just 1 minute please. إذا الألارم صحيح ممكن نطلع من القاعة، إذا كان خطأ ممكن ننتظر. أوكي طيب بناخذ سؤال هنا بعدين نطلع سؤال عند الأخوات وتفضل يا أستاذ.
السلام عليكم.
السلام. بس رجاء يعني عشان الوقت سؤال يكون مختصر ومباشر. الله يعافيك.
My question in Arabic language, sir. شكرا بروفيسور سينغ للمحاضرة القيمة. والسؤال: ماذا يحتاج المعلم العربي السعودي من وجهة نظرك إلى تطوير مستوى أداه المهني؟ شكرا.
Right. Well, I must confess that I don't have a deep understanding of the Saudi system as such. But in terms of the kind of skills that the Saudi teachers need, I think it's very parallel in terms of the kind of competencies that teachers must have elsewhere, which is that, first of all, I think we cannot compromise on deep disciplinary knowledge. So it is, we tell our teachers, even you have been teaching many years, if you are a mathematics teacher, you still need to continue to develop your disciplinary knowledge in mathematics, in physics, and so on. So number one, to have that deep disciplinary knowledge. Why? We encourage our teachers to make sure that in the library, if I go to a school and I don't see Scientific American, I don't see Times, I don't see many scientific journals, I say, principal, you better buy it, because while you are in the discipline, you need to read very widely. In thinking of what is it that's happening in science, in the real world, and then try to link it to your field. So that's one, the disciplinary knowledge. Secondly, I think the teachers need to develop skills of pedagogy to encourage teaching that is a lot more collaborative, self-directed, that is less dependent on just didactics. So providing for the students' inquiry. So this is the second set. The third set of the teacher skills is, has been set in the last 2 days, which is the importance of understanding technology and utilizing the affordances of technology.
طبعا الوقت انتهى والآن يعني هو وقت استراحة، فالسؤال الأخير بناخذه من الأخوات فوق، لكن يعني في حرية الآن اللي يبغى يعني يطلع وقت الاستراحة ممكن يطلع، لكن بناخذ السؤال عند الأخوات فوق لو تكرم.
First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Singh for his presentation, which he concluded on the values for professional learning community. You said that you have established special mechanism to apply this professional community in Singapore. Can you elaborate on that, please? Thank you.
So in the pre-service, we have empowered and worked very closely with the schools. So university professors are not necessarily, the people who knows best about the classroom, right? So what we do is that in the teaching practice, we have built out a very strong mentoring network system. So when the teachers go to these schools, they already learn to have this kind of a community learning from their senior teachers. And we also make sure that they have what we call a e-portfolio system, whereby the teachers share notes on the challenges of their teaching and learning with fellow teachers, both on the e-platform as well as in a physical format of meeting and sharing. So that is at the pre-service. Now, in the in-service, teachers now, in Singapore, we have formed a teachers' academy, and where we encourage teachers of the various disciplines, let's say the arts, the sciences, and so on, to gather together to share. And basically, the ministry provide and fund resources for a lot of these activities to happen.
Okay, thank you very much. شكرا لكم يعني اخواني واخواتي لحسن الاستماع. ايضا نشكر الدكتور تان على هذه يعني العرض الجيد المتكامل، ويعني ممكن هو موجود بيننا، ممكن اللي في اسئله عنده ممكن يطرحها، وانا اعتقد فعلا انه فرصه وجوده معنا ناخذ كثير من الاسئله. شكرا لكم. الان يعني تفضلوا للاستراحه. راح نكون إن شاء الله مع بعض بعد 10 دقائق، عن 9:45 دقيقة تبدأ إن شاء الله حلقة النقاش. حلقة النقاش إن شاء الله بيقدمها طبعا زميلنا الأستاذ خالد الحارثي أيضا في هذه القاعة، والجميع مدعو لحضورها. شكرا لكم، وإن شاء الله تكون يعني استفدنا من هذا اللقاء. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.